outside? Should I run and hide? How do I take my company worldwide? Do you love the law? Did you watch Hee-Haw? What's the weirdest thing that you ever saw? What's it like in court? Favorite sport? Can you help with my book report? Is my hair too long? Am I right or wrong? And do you mind if I sing along to anything? Ask Alan anything in the world.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Ask Alan. I'm Alan Crone, the CEO of the Crone Law Firm, and I've got a genuine local celebrity. He's world famous in Memphis, and that is the award-winning columnist for the Daily Memphian and radio personality Geoff Calkins. Geoff, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Alan. I like that. World famous in Memphis. You know, I actually came up with a phrase. I don't know if I qualify, but I think that people who are famous in Memphis and not beyond, and I don't even know that I'm famous in Memphis, but I think it's Mem-famous. You know, it's like you could go 20 miles outside of Memphis and no one's heard of me. Here, they might well back up over the commercial appeal when I used to work there or curse my name. But yeah, it's been fun to do this for so many years, and it's fun to be on with you.
Well, I'm gonna start. And I didn't tell you I was going to do this, but I'm going to start with the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
The fact that even though you don't know anything about it, you have been a marital irritant in my marriage for a long time.
Yeah.
Because my wife just thinks you're absolutely hysterical.
I am. She has the good taste.
And that's my job in my house, is to be hysterical. And I think you're the only person that's more hysterical in my house than I am.
Oh, well,
but we've joked about that for years. And so I told her today. I said, "Well, you know, I'm interviewing Calkins, and I'll pass your affection along to him." And she said, "You do that."
Well, I appreciate
exactly
that.
The word she used.
You know, I grew up as one of 9 kids, and in that environment, you need a little, you know, I couldn't do stand up, but you do need a little humor to get through the day. And so I think my ability to talk or to get through life with a little humor comes from having 7 older siblings and 1 younger sibling, and having to figure out how to live with all of them in one big house.
My wife's fandom became solidified, and this is the last thing I'll say, and I'll get off of this.
Yeah.
But she wanted me to make sure that I mention this to you. You may or may not remember during the controversy and debate about changing the University of Mississippi's mascot.
Yeah.
You referred to the costumed mascot at the time, which was Colonel Reb.
Uh-huh.
Remember how you referred to him, the moniker you gave him?
No memory whatsoever.
Well, you referred to him as the mustachioed battle geezer.
That's not bad.
and I think she laughed for 20 minutes over that.
He is a bit of a mustachioed battle geezer. I have to say, I think I got that one right. That's
well, as a long-time Memphis fan, you know, we have our love-hate relationship with Ole Miss, and I really regret that they've gone from the Black Bear to the Land Shark.
Right.
Because I really enjoyed calling them the Black Bears. And the conversation always went
irritate the hell out of everybody.
Yeah, the conversation would always go like this. Ole Miss fan. Well, how are the Black Bears doing? Well, we're not the Black Bears. We're the Rebels. Well, if I looked on your sidelines for a mascot, would I see a Rebel or would I see a Black Bear? Oh, shut up.
So wait, it doesn't work if you try the same tactic with the Land Sharks?
They like the Land Shark. They didn't like the
really
Black Bear.
Black Bear.
So anyway, you know, we have fun. I enjoyed that. But as I say, in our house, the moniker mustachioed battle geezer will never die.
Well, I appreciate that. It's good to be remembered for something.
Well, you're a recovering lawyer, are you not?
I am. I'm a recovering lawyer. I was, you know, I grew up in this family where my parents were both physicians, and it felt like there were 2 paths. You could either, you know, go to law, you could go to medical school, or if you didn't like organic chemistry and you would faint at the sight of blood, that was me, you could go to law school. And so I trundled off to law school for lack of anything better to do. And I always tell people, if you want to be a lawyer, go to law school and be a lawyer. But this idea, which was popular once upon a time, I think maybe less so now, that people are a little more practical, that you can quote unquote do anything with a law degree, I think lures people who really aren't interested in being lawyers to law school. And the truth of the matter is, if you go to law school, you become a lawyer. I mean, there's a reason too. It's not some great general education. And I'm not saying that it doesn't broaden out the way you think, and it hasn't helped me in some small ways over the years. But the truth of the matter is that I think I went to law school because, I liked history, I liked politics, but I didn't ever really want to be a lawyer. And as here I am scrambling to get my taxes done, I'm horrible at the level of detailed work that is required to be an effective lawyer. Now, it's not all detailed work. A lot of it's strategic thinking and everything else. But I was a great law student, but I was not a great lawyer, and I was intensely unhappy, and decided to do something else, which was, I thought, what did you like to do when you were 12? And it was read the sports section. So I said, well, let's go try that. So that's sort of how it happened. But yeah, I was a really good law student and a pretty bad lawyer.
I loved law school. I,
Right.
I see people now, my classmates or whatever. Oh, I hated law. I said, I love law school. It was
Well,
great.
law school, you get to debate the big issues, right? Like in law school, for example, a lot of people don't know. People know that if you discover evidence with an illegal search, that if the cops break down your door and then the evidence is excluded because it was an illegal search, right? But nobody knows that thing is like, doesn't make sense. Okay, so you violate someone's constitutional rights by not having a warrant. But the idea of the exclusionary rule, is that really the best? Is that in the end, there's real evidence there that we are discarding, as they say, because the constable has blundered. You could instead just suspend the cop and use the evidence. And so you can have these great debates about that or anything in constitutional law. But then when you actually are practicing real estate law, or for me, it was mostly labor and employment, you're not so much grappling with the big issues. You're grappling with big issues in people's lives, but those big debates of law school, I don't think are really the stuff of being a lawyer. What's your experience?
I think that's right. I mean, I enjoy representing people and helping solve their problems. And what you just said reminds me of conversations I've had with several different federal judges. And they all say, I don't say they all say the same thing, but these two judges, one was a Democrat, one is a Republican, and they said the same thing in different ways, but which basically was, I became a federal judge because I wanted to rule on, desegregation issues and
Right.
constitutional issues. But that's not the bread and butter of what, comes in front of a federal judge every day. It's important things, it's taking someone's guilty plea, or presiding over a criminal trial, or a huge medical malpractice case or whatever. But it's day-to-day humdrum, and I think that's the way it is with.
And it's important, as you point out, it's importance in people's lives. It's really immediate, of real importance to the people who are your clients. And for me, I was at a big 500 lawyer law firm, and we represented the country of Japan. We represented the Democratic National Committee. We represented George Washington University. We represented the local power company. And I just found, I like the idea of being in a courtroom, sort of. And if there were 2 trials for the whole year for the 500 lawyer law firm, that was probably a lot. It's just not what we did. We did papers going back and forth. And so it wasn't for me. And it's funny, when I tell the story, I usually say, well, I just didn't have the spring in my step that I should have when I was, about being a lawyer. But the truth of the matter is, I was intensely unhappy. I was doing a recent podcast with Rob Fisher, the Grizzlies sideline reporter, and he was talking about his own mental health issues and that he has had. And I was really intensely unhappy. I was a non-functioning in my 20s. It all comes crashing down. I got all A's. I've done the right thing, and I was just really unhappy in a way that was sort of clinical. And I knew I had to stop, and I knew I had to figure something out. I think this idea that people should just, that it's easy to find what people want to do for a living, I think it's really hard for a lot of people. And as my kids now are going into their 20s, your 20s is the decade where you usually find a partner, a marital partner, you found your spouse, and you settle on your career. And we spend so much time thinking about preparing kids to pick the right college, but those two things, your career and I don't know that we fully acknowledge how hard it is, and the pressure on kids in their 20s, I say kids now, to get it right. I think it's really hard because you're supposed to make money, you're supposed to have an impact on society, you're supposed to be, a job you're supposed to love. There's a lot of pressure to figure out what you want to do. And I don't like to tell my story as if it was some totally clean story without floundering, because there was some real floundering in there in my 20s.
Well, and I think you did show some courage that a lot of people just don't have the courage to do, which is to say, okay, I'm gonna, if you're a poker player, I've got a heavy pot odds in the legal profession. I've got this education, I've spend money to get my education. I've got experience as a lawyer. Now I'm going to go do something completely different, which is wonderful. But a lot of people just kind of feel trapped in what they're doing, and they got to break out of that somehow.
If it was courage, I was sort of, I don't know what a breakdown looks like, but I was pretty intensely unhappy. Like, I had applied to journalism school a couple times thinking I might want to get out. And then finally, I was just so intensely unhappy, I knew I had to do something. The other advantage is that because I had a pretty good background in law, I went to this little town in Alabama, Anniston, Alabama, to cover high school sports for $225 a week, exactly as I was getting engaged. It was an unconventional move. But I knew that if I wanted to go back and practice law again, I'll just tell them I wanted to get this out of my system. I would have been able to go back and get a legal job. And there were times, honestly, it wasn't sustainable to make $225 a week for the rest of my life covering high school sports in small town Alabama. So if I hadn't been able to get to where I wanted to go in this line of work, I actually probably would have gone back to being a lawyer.
Well, anybody that is a regular listener of your show or Gary Parrish's show knows that you went to Harvard.
I try to keep it a secret, but it leaks out every once in a while.
All right. So that was for law school.
College and law school, actually.
That was what I asked you. You did both undergraduate and law school at Harvard.
Yeah. So I had a Rotary scholarship in Australia after college, and I applied to Harvard Law School to see if I'd get into the Michigan Law School, because we have a small cabin in the woods up there, and I wondered if I could get residency. But I was supposed to stay in Australia because it's the years are different over there till October or November. And so then I got into law school, Harvard Law School, and how the heck do you say no, right? And
Right.
I was worried about all these people who were back home accomplishing things as I was just drinking beer in the Outback. And so I came back early from my Rotary, and I went to law school at Harvard. And then I clerked for a judge, James Buckley, William F. Buckley's brother, on the U.S. Court of Appeals. I did that for a year, and then I worked at a big firm. But, I talk about this in terms of privilege and how people grow up. So there's 9 kids in my family, 5 boys. The 5 boys, my dad went to Harvard and Harvard Medical School. My brother Steve went to Yale and Harvard Law School. My brother Ben went to Harvard College and Michigan Law School. My brother Hugh went to Williams College and Harvard Medical School. And my brother Tim went to Yale College and Harvard Business School. So I did what I was put on a path and grew up in a family where that's sort of what you did. Now, you still had to get A's along the way to make that possible and stuff, but it's why I do believe in the American dream, and I do believe that you can change your circumstances, and I do believe but I really also believe that if to say that I had the opportunities I had without acknowledging that I had incredible, grew up a family that made all that possible for me, and it's not possible for everybody. It's not, we don't all start from the same place. And so I have great regard for people who really are able do that on their own. Yeah, again, I had to work hard along the way, but I had enormous lift just because I had a family that really, my dad never spent more than $10,000 for a car. And he died last year at the age of 99. But he spent a lot more than $10,000 on tuition.
Yeah.
That's where the values were. And so that's what we did.
Well, when you were making this transition, were there any role models you had in journalism that where you thought, that's what I would like to do. That's who I would like to be.
Like people always said, why don't you write about sports? Why don't you write about sports law? Or why don't you be a sports lawyer? Well, as there really is no such thing as sports law. You can go work for Covington and Burling, which represents the NFL, and that's antitrust law. Or you can, I didn't want to write about law and sports. I wanted to write about games. It's fun. Mm-hmm. And so really the person who I read more than anyone else at the time, and when I was 12 and I misbehaved, mom would say no newspaper for a week. Like I loved reading the newspaper. I loved reading the columnist in my town, Larry Felser. But then when I started doing this, Mitch Albom, and this was before he started writing all these novels, Tuesdays with Morrie and all the rest, he was a sports writer who wrote about people really effectively. And he won all kinds of awards. He was in Fort Lauderdale, and then he became in Detroit, and he still writes some. It's amazing that he still writes sports columns as successfully as with his books. But I love the way that he wrote about humanity and the way that he wrote in a way that it was really accessible and that it wasn't just hardcore sports fans wanted to read him, but anyone who was interested in the human condition would. And so I used to lug around. When I first got here, I thought I was woefully unequipped to be the columnist at the Commercial Appeal. And there were 3 people at the Commercial Appeal who wanted the job, who really didn't take kindly to me getting it, I'll be honest. So I used to go to games, and I had a collection of Mitch Albom columns in my backpack. And sometimes I'd sit in my car beforehand and read them just to think to study how he did this, how he put the words together in a way. And I think it's a lot like, anything. You do it enough and ultimately it becomes your own. But as you're starting to do something, you look at the people who do it well and how they do it. And that's whether it's argue in a courtroom or play a musical instrument or put a roof on a house. And in the end, it becomes your talent. And my voice is now different than Mitch's was or whatever else. But I probably read Mitch Albom more than anyone else with an eye towards how does he do this?
So how does Memphis and Buffalo compare to each other?
Well, they're incredibly similar because, the obvious differences are in snow and weather and all of that. So in terms of climate, not at all. But I think being the columnist in Memphis, I was well prepared for it because Buffalo is a really underdog city. It's the second city clearly in New York. It's overlooked basically by the New York state government. People would say you're from New York to me. Oh, you're from Buffalo is the furthest thing from New York. Buffalo is like a small Cleveland. Geographically, it's 7 hours from New York, 6.5. And it really has a much more Midwestern sensibility. But then people would always, tell Buffalo jokes, it's not the end of the world, but you can see it, but you can see it, and it was just crapped on. It was a town that was a steel town when I was growing up. And then the steel mills left and incredible unemployment and a lot of the challenges, population decrease, which is some of the things. And so I just it's sort of a chip on the shoulder place, but really lovely people who love the community. And I think Memphis is much the same thing. Like it's this sort of underdog city that people, and it's actually changed. When I moved here originally, it felt to me like there was not the same pride in Memphis that Buffalonians had in Buffalo. But I think that has changed dramatically over the last 20 years, maybe even to an excess now, 901 everything. Now we really are beating our chests all the time about 901. And I do think we have to acknowledge the challenges we have still. But I think that sort of chip on the shoulder, underdog, mentality but Buffalo used to call itself too the city of good neighbors. And I think Memphis is a city of good neighbors. You arrive in Memphis as a Yankee from Buffalo and Boston, and I thought it was going to be this cold place, hard to crack in. I'd seen The Firm, and so and in the end, what you realize is you meet one person, and they introduce you to five more people, and they introduce you to five more people, and pretty soon you feel like, and everyone, if you show the slightest inclination to roll up your sleeves and embrace Memphis, like there's every opportunity in the world for you to do it. So to me, it's actually been a perfect fit.
What year did you arrive in Memphis?
I arrived in Memphis in 96, the year that Memphis, I arrived for, and the first thing I covered was the Super Bowl, but then Memphis lost to Drexel in the NCAA tournament. Lorenzen Wright was last year.
Mm-hmm.
Then Larry Finch's last year. And also Memphis beating Tennessee at the Liberty Bowl in football. So that was what was happening in sports. But it was 96, which was right after Memphis had missed out on the NFL. Then the Titans moved to Nashville, and that was a blow to the civic ego. And so all that was unfolding.
I think that Memphis really turned in that way you're talking about, civic pride, Redbird Stadium. I think the opening of Redbird Stadium said to everybody, yeah, we can do something right in Memphis.
Right.
And really set the stage for FedEx Forum and Memphis in May really taking off and becoming as big as it is. But I just remember a lot of people saying, can you believe we built this in Memphis?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, and can you believe that we did it on time and under budget?
Yeah. Well, and it was, and the backstory, of course, is that for about 2 years preceding that, it was this hole in the ground at 3rd and Union that would be much mocked about our giant swimming pool or hole in the ground at 3rd and Union and what was going to happen. And in the end, Dean Jerdigan obviously overspent, and it was some financial challenges in terms of how they put that deal together. But I agree completely. When it finally opened and you walked into that stadium, you would hear people all the time say, this doesn't feel like Memphis, which is a compliment to the place. It was miraculously beautiful. It still is beautiful, by the way. I went to the opener last week. It's a gorgeous place. But it says something about what you thought about Memphis if this quality place doesn't feel like Memphis. Now, I don't think when something opens that's great, people say, this doesn't feel like Memphis. Now it feels like a continuation of a whole bunch of great things we've done. Shelby Farms, the Green Line, the Shell refurbishment, like you can go on and on and on. The Big River Crossing. We need to work on our bridges, I gather. But it's to me, it's assumed that the next thing might be great. And once upon a time, it was not.
No, that's right. That's right. So you get to Memphis in the late 90s and working for the Commercial Appeal. Mm-hmm. What was it like working in the Commercial Appeal in those days?
Oh, listen, I'm really glad that I got to be a newspaper person when newspapers meant what they did, right? Like when you become the columnist at a big city newspaper, what it used to be, it's a responsibility. And particularly in this town where lots of wonderful columnists had come before, starting with Walter Stewart, and then George Lapidus was a radio guy when I got here, but he'd been a columnist at the Press Scimitar, and it's in 250,000 driveways. Like everybody read the Commercial Appeal, and not only that, we covered everything. We had a sports staff. Right now, I bet the Commercial Appeal staff is, I don't know exactly, 30, 32, something like that. We had a sports staff of 24 when I got here. That counts the writers and also then the editors and stuff there. So, and we covered home and away. We covered Arkansas football, Ole Miss football, Mississippi State football, Tennessee football, Memphis football, and because it was the paper of the Delta, and we circulated in Arkansas and we circulated in Mississippi. And so we therefore covered those places. And so I covered lots of games. Of course, I would be at UT Florida every single the third, whatever it was, the third Saturday in September, I'd be at UT Florida every single game. And not only that, I've covered 8 Olympics, and we would cover everything. We covered the Kentucky Derby, and I covered the World Series, and I covered the Masters, and on and on and on. And that's when newspapers were basically printing money. And because the only way you could reach everybody was a newspaper. There was the internet didn't exist. So if you wanted to sell a house, get a job, whatever it was, you had to advertise in the commercial appeal. And so it was a thrill. And it was a pretty darn good paper. And to the extent that it's changed, it's not really anyone's fault as much as all those financial underpinnings. Now, if you want to, buy a house or a car, you don't need to go to the newspaper. If you want to get a job, you don't need to go to the newspaper. If you want to, and so all the ads went away. People say all the time, well, people don't read anymore. No, the truth of the matter is people probably read more than ever, because stories you write here can be read here and all over the world. But the financial underpinnings are gone, and I think that really hurts. I think it hurts communities. I'll be honest. I think it was a better world. We had 250 journalists at the Commercial Appeal when I got there, and now let's say there's 30. Well, there's another 30, 35 maybe at the Daily Memphian, which is, thank God, because now you have 60, 65, whatever it is, maybe 70, whatever, something like that. But that's still a fraction of what we had when I got here covering our community.
Yeah, I remember very clearly in the late 90s thinking erroneously, I'm glad I didn't make any investments based on this thought. Well, the newspapers are going to own the internet because they've got all the content. And kind of like if Sears had been able to Sears could have been Amazon, but it was too mired in its own thinking to do that. And so the newspapers had the same problem, didn't they? They just couldn't make that transition, and it really is baffling.
Now, I don't know, because that's absolutely, but the idea of marketing in a newspaper, when you think about the newspaper box on the street, is to literally put your product face down in a stack, and hope people put a quarter in and we're able to, that's how we marketed. We didn't market. People just bought the paper. And I don't know, in other words, very clearly, Sears failed to do that. Local taxi companies, are now being disrupted by Uber, or whatever the industry is that was disrupted by the thing that came. If it had been a shrewder, more visionary leadership, could newspapers have flipped it around somehow? Or was it always going to be that the folks who controlled access to the internet are the folks who are going to make the money? But very clearly, that is what happened. And newspapers have totally floundered in the way they did it. For the first time, what they started out by doing was all right, we're just going to give it all away for free on the internet and get as many clicks as we can. And then we'll assume that we'll be able to monetize that sometime. And then they realized we're never going to be able to monetize that. So then they started putting up paywalls. Well, at this point, people were trained to think they should get it for free, although for hundreds of years, you had to actually pay if you wanted to read a newspaper, because for 10 years, we gave it all away from free. Now, when you put up a paywall asking them to pay, they're like, screw you, we're not going to pay. It's supposed to be free. And so now there's a hybrid, and there are certain, listen, the New York Times is doing fine, still not as well. It has many more readers, but it doesn't have the revenues that it once had. The Wall Street Journal, because it's so essential, really, if you're going to be they're able to charge and people pay. But at places at smaller markets, generalized newspapers, it's been a real crisis in terms of figuring out how to do this. And it's one reason why the Daily Memphian model, which is sort of this blend of philanthropy, a nonprofit, but also subscription, we're hoping works, but one never knows.
That's right. We're in that period of transition, and nobody likes change at all. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But as a politician, I remember I was chairman of the Republican Party in the 2000s, 2000 to 2003, and I remember in those days. Anytime I wanted, I'd get my name in the paper. I'd call up Susie Thorpe or
Oh,
Jimmy
Susie,
Covington, and and people knew who I was,
Right.
and I was really nobody. And same with city councilmen and everything else. And then when I was on the city council, there were so few columnists that it was very, I could say the most outlandish things and it wouldn't end up in the paper. In fact, I tried it a couple of times just to see if I could do it.
Because nobody was covering the darn thing.
Nobody was covering it.
Right.
Kyle Veazey was down there for the commercial appeal at the time, and he did a good job. But again, you're talking about 24 sports reporters. When I was coming up in politics, there were probably 24 political reporters.
We had someone covering the state house, and we had someone covering the county, someone covering the city, someone covering. And you're right, Susie would write a political column, and Jimmy Covington was great. So I think there's something lost when. And again, like you'll have plenty of people covering the Kardashians, right, or John Morant. You won't have as many people covering the city council, and that's, to me, in the end, more important, and where the work of democracy happens. But people don't click on it, and we're driven by clicks or what drives subscriptions, and so I think a lot of meaty reporting that's necessary suffers.
Yeah. Susie used to talk. I've had a number of conversations with her, and she would, she had an office in the city hall. There was a bureau in City Hall, and she says, "Now I'm not gonna say, but it's possible that reporters would go and look in people's garbage cans and do some actual reporting." On things, and you just don't have that kind of, because these guys are so spread so thin, like Bill Dries and Ryan and a few other folks. They don't have the time to really get to know the players and the processes the way that they used to in the old days.
Right, and then the pandemic hasn't helped either in covering it. I'll be honest, like it's much harder to get, because in the end you need relationships with people. And so whether you're covering a football team or city council, it's tough when things are by Zoom.
Well, let's talk sports a little bit. I don't want to date the show too much, but how important do you think, and why are our sports teams in Memphis so important in Memphis? Is it more important in Memphis than it is other places?
Well, I don't know. I think. I mean, would you say that in Memphis they're more important than the Packers are to Green Bay, or the Saints are to New Orleans, or the Bills are to Buffalo, or you can go right down, the Red Sox are to Boston, or the Cardinals are to Louisville? I think, but what I would say is that I think to some extent that narrative of sports bringing people together can be overdone. Like, Detroit has won a lot of championships, but Detroit's actually coming out now as doing much better as a city, but for a long time it was not. Did those championships, whether it be the Tigers have won them, the Red Wings won a whole bunch, Pistons won some, did they save the city in any meaningful way? Or no, I don't think so. I think it's funny though, because in the pandemic, we really saw the impact of the pandemic first in sports, right? Like when the NBA shut down, it was like, whoa, this is going to really hit us. And then restaurants. And why? Because that's our gathering place now. Sports is the place where, at least physically, we do come together more than any other place. It's our, we build these giant stadiums to sports. We build, our weekends around sports. And so I really do think it has become this gathering place. And it's why the absence of it during the pandemic, when it was threatened, hit so hard, and why we really noticed it first through the pandemic, and why, as we're coming alive, sports coming alive is a real part of that rebirth. So I think it matters everywhere from that perspective. I think the way that it specifically mattered to Memphis, though, was in the way that you touched on earlier with AutoZone Park, not just the physical structure, but I've told the story a lot. When I first moved here, with my parents helped me move here the weekend, and we went to see the Memphis Symphony, and at halftime at the intermission, that's me, halftime. At the intermission, my parents, we were talking to the people next to us, and And they asked me two questions that I did not expect to be answered. One, you wouldn't be asked this up north, but you are now down, is have you found a church home? That's not a question that you get asked in Buffalo in the first 5 questions. And then the second one is, why would you move here? Why did you move to Memphis? And what they really meant is, why the hell did you move to Memphis? And that was embedded, I really do believe, in the mentality. Now, the good things that have happened in Memphis over the last 20 years go far beyond sports. The challenges are still there too. But I think sports in the Redbirds and in the Grizzlies really helped to, in this specific moment of time, reframe the way Memphians think about themselves and think about their community at a time when it was really critical. And, that whole Believe Memphis stuff with the Grizzlies, and it's been 10 years now since the river was rising and the Grizzlies were having the playoff run and people were holding up the Believe Memphis tout. No one believed in Memphis when I moved here. Like, not no one, but it was not popular to believe in Memphis when I moved here. And I really think that sports has had a real crystallizing effect. Now, again, that doesn't mean that we should ignore other problems or anything else. Believe in Memphis, we shouldn't believe in the flaws. We should try to fix the flaws. But I think it meant a whole lot here at that particular time and place. And it's why, I collected a book of columns. I didn't write a book. I just stapled a bunch of my columns together and called it a book. But it's called The 20 Best Years in Memphis Sports. It's about the 20 best years in Memphis sports. And I really think it was the 20 years when sports meant the most to Memphis. I really think that was a integral period in reframing how Memphians think about themselves.
Well, and we had a bunch of really groundbreaking things all happen, kind of, starting with Redbirds. Then the Grizzlies came, which I think validated Memphis as a big time city. To be a big time city in this country, you've got to have at least one professional franchise of the major leagues. So you get the Grizzlies. Then Calipari goes on his run, which kind of reestablishes the university as a player in basketball. I remember during that time when
we had the Tyson Lewis fight in there too, which was a blast.
That's right.
Too, in the midst of all that. And then Memphis football sort of took off at the tail end of that as well. But yeah, it was a great stretch of Memphis sports when it really, and Calipari, I had my conflicts with him, but I loved the way that he represented Memphis to the world. He was unapologetic. He had that natural chip on his shoulder attitude. And you're exactly right. That was another important development and so I think you're absolutely right. I think it helped us sort of change the way we think about ourselves. Now, right now, does the Grizzlies, what do they do in the playoffs matter that much to our civic? Not this year, but who knows what they might accomplish in the next 10 years. It might, there might be more to come, and we hope there will be.
I talked about Calipari. First couple of years that he was here, as you may recall, he was struggling, as any new coach is going to struggle. And, people say, we need to get rid of Calipari. And even when he went to Kentucky, he said, well, what did Calipari do for us? And I said, well, look, when Calipari came, the coach immediately before him had a sex scandal with a co-ed. And we didn't even make SportsCenter. And I think that's how Memphis felt at that time, was just completely irrelevant. And people like John put us back on the map. And but Memphis had to also consent to go along with that.
It's undeniable that John was great for the community and great for the city of Memphis. Absolutely. Her name was Chenoa Douglas. That was the great sports scandal. And that's when Mayor Wharton, he represented Tick Price in that scandal. I remember there was a press conference but we had some colorful moments along the way, that's for sure. But you're absolutely right, is that John had to do it himself too. Like, John was the kind of guy who would arrange for a booster to give the new weight room. He would arrange for the who's going to give away the big screen TV every game to make sure that fans pack the pyramid. He didn't leave it to other people. He rolled up his sleeves and changed that program in a way that I had occasional disagreements with him about things, but I advocated him for be hired, and he was fabulous while he was here.
Yes, yes. And then it all kind of culminated recently, right before the pandemic, with the as you say, the football Tigers and Sports Center and not Sports Center, what game day,
yeah,
and whatnot. And so where do we go from here, Geoff, as a community in sports?
Oh, I think if you look ahead, I don't think there's going to be any great expansion. I think, honestly, I don't believe it would be wonderful if the University of Memphis could get into a Power 5 conference. But I don't think that's going to happen. It doesn't seem, even since like David Rudd invested himself mightily in that for a while. And then when it didn't work, they didn't get into the Big 12. They do get into the Big East, it falls apart, whatever. I think they are where they are there. I think it's really, I honestly think, what can Penny get done? I still believe in Penny. And I think he hasn't done what he wanted to do in his first years here, but it's undeniably in a better place, the program, than when he took over, and it's not close. So can he get them back into the tournament? Can that be make meaningful tournament runs again? But I think really that's sort of what's interesting is the postseason futures of the Grizzlies and the basketball Tigers. Because,
well, let me ask you this: since you talked about the tournament, I thought it was fascinating during the NIT. If you listen to the announcers, they all but said, well, if it hadn't been for the season shutting down in 2020, they would have made the tournament that year, which I don't think that's what we all thought at the time.
Well, they weren't going to make the tournament in 2020. They would have had to win the conference tournament. The only way to look at 2020 is another year when Memphis missed the tournament. You can try to hide behind the fact that they didn't have a tournament, but Memphis was not on track to make it.
I don't disagree with you, but I thought it was fascinating that was the ESPN talking point during the coverage. I'm not complaining about it. I just thought it was interesting. Why do you have any thoughts on why nationally that would be what they would think, or are they just trying to be nice?
Generally, TV people try to be nice. Like they put the best face. They talk about what a great whoever is in front of them, they talk them up. One of the startling things, honestly, about this past season of Memphis basketball was for the first half when Memphis was as dysfunctional as they were offensively. I've never heard national commentators be as hard on a college team as just bluntly talk about the level of dysfunction on offense and whatnot that Memphis had. Penny fixed it. But I think what you were hearing there was mostly national commentators want to be upbeat and try to be upbeat. Now, to me, the big question with Memphis going forward is, and we were talking about this on my radio show today, literally was, Memphis is right now in front of the NCAA, this new investigative body, and they have said that their decisions on all pending cases, the big pending cases, are going to come down in the next year. Well, that's probably between now and the next NCAA tournament. And fair or not, I think there's a reasonable chance that Memphis gets whacked. And I think there's a reasonable chance that any punishment would include a ban from the NCAA tournament. So I think Memphis is poised to be better this year in basketball. But I can absolutely see a circumstance where there they are rolling along better in basketball, and yet down comes this decision from the NCAA, and it feels like Memphis is always getting a shiv from the NCAA. I worry a little bit about that going forward. I think that's the biggest threat hanging over any element of Memphis sports. And I think the biggest promise, though, is Memphis again making deep tournament runs, and the Grizzlies with Ja Morant, getting back to at least as far as they did under the Core Four, which is the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah, we've been chasing the elusive national championship for so long. How important do you think that is for a program like Memphis to actually win? Is that more for the fans?
Let me ask you this. I think it's for the city and the fans and all of that. I guess I would say this. how much fun has it been to be a Memphis fan over the last, let's start from 72, 73. From then until now, it's been a blast, right? Memphis fans have had a wonderful time following their Tigers through the years, through the good years and through the bad years. And the essence of the pleasure of being a fan cannot be in winning a championship. Otherwise, it's a pretty poor payoff.
Right.
I've been a Bills fan since I was, 10 or 8 or something, and a Sabres fan. My teams have never won a title. Title is a bonus. The joy of being a fan is the community that you have with your family and your friends and the people sitting next to you in the seat, and the feeling. Even during the NIT, you could feel it. Like, everyone's like, it's just the NIT. It was a blast during the NIT to watch Memphis win as many games as they did, rolling along. And so, no, Memphis didn't win a title under Calipari, but those years were a blast. And so I can't imagine what it would be like if you're a Red Sox fan to finally win that world championship. And it must be cathartic and wonderful, but it can't be what it's about. What it's about is about the community that you have and that you build along the way. Really, I think what happens on Tiger Lane is as important or more important than what happens on the football field. And I think that's why we love sports as much as we do.
In terms of Tiger basketball,
yeah,
if we had won, and I say we because I've got 2 degrees from the University of Memphis, in one of the 3 Final Fours that we had been to, whether the NCAA recognizes that we've been to them or not, would that make a difference in where the perception nationally of the program is? Or is Memphis going to be in this, top 25, top 30, no matter what it does?
Oh, I think incrementally it would be another nice little, and it's a former national championship program. I think you notice that. But in terms of its stature year in and year out, the most important things are we live in a city that produces basketball players, where basketball matters and it produces basketball players. And we live in a city where people care about the basketball team. And so they're going to fill a stadium. And so it's those 2 things, the level of interest and therefore support that it will get and a team will get. The coach will be paid, they'll fly, on their private jets, whatever. And the recruiting base, to me, are why Memphis basketball will always be relevant and a factor. Would there be just a little bit more prestige connected to the program if they had won a national championship somewhere along the way? Sure. But I don't think meaningfully year to year, that's what makes Memphis relevant. What makes Memphis relevant is we're a ridiculously good basketball town that cares deeply.
My son, James, who you've met,
yes.
You were nice enough to let his fiance, who's a nurse, play with Gus.
Yep.
Which was very appreciated.
And he was lovely, by the way. He was so gracious in asking me to do it, and they sent me a thank you card and everything else. Yes,
well, I'm glad to hear. He takes after his mother.
Okay.
But he plays basketball, and you've met him. He's 6'4", but he's 145 pounds. I mean, he would fall over in a stiff wind. And he plays these pickup games with these med students from Knoxville, and they kept asking him, well, where'd you play high school ball? And he said, well, I wasn't good enough to make my high school team. He's a good shooter, but he went to Christian Brothers, and just being a good shooter wasn't enough to get you on that team. And he said, you just don't understand. He said, I could go to any, playground in this town and pick the first 5 guys and win the state championship with them, most likely. And when you talk about Memphis as a basketball town, it really is seeped in basketball. And I just don't think outside of Memphis, again, going full circle back to the world famous in Memphis, a lot of people just don't appreciate it the way they probably should.
No, I mean, Ian, we just look at the NCAA tournament. There's this North Texas team that's suddenly making a noise in the NCAA tournament, led by a guard from Memphis. Memphis has the players who obviously stay here, but then it has players who go play for places people play all over the country. I really think Memphis is I don't know. To me, the best thing about Memphis is that you matter here. Is that in life, we want to have what you want to have, want to have a nice house and a nice life and all that. But in the end, what we want to make a difference. We all want to feel like our time on earth here mattered. And I think in this city, I lived in Boston and in Washington and New York City. And I think here you really have a sense that you matter and can make an impact. And there's almost an obligation to make an impact. And to me, that's the thing about them. If you roll up your sleeves, whatever it is, you were talking about basketball, but I immediately went to the broader universe. I really think this is a unique city in the sense that every person here is needed to make a contribution, and that our weaknesses in that way are really in some ways a strength, because it creates an opportunity to do good things for your neighbors and to help build up our community. I just have loved it. It's just been a blast to be here for. I never could have imagined. It would be like you. How did you end up in Schenectady, New York? Well, it's just crazy that I ended up in Memphis, but it's just been the privilege of my life.
Well, reading you, it's obvious that it's not just more than a job to you, that you like the city. And I'll end by saying I really enjoy the human aspect you bring to sports, particularly a lot of the profiles that you do of sports fans, and even some profiles that have anything to do with sports. Yeah. And I think that's an important reason why you're making a difference in Memphis.
Well, it's funny. My mom, I started out writing stories. I had leukemia when I was a kid. And so I was hospitalized for quite a while, and I would write stories, and my mom would type them up and she'd send them back to my third grade class. And that's sort of how I began as a storyteller. But it's funny. I happen to have a seventh grade. This is from my seventh grade. They made us keep a journal. Mr. Alexandrovich did. And every day, keep a journal. And I was looking back at what I'd written in this journal. And so the very last entry, this is from May 19th, 1974. So a good long while ago. I was in seventh grade. My mom raised standard poodles when we were little. And standard poodles, there comes a moment when their dogs are 3 weeks old, when you have to take off the end of their tails. You have to dock their tails, okay? So what do we have from 1974 in my journal, in a cellophane baggie? There is the end of a tail from 1974, and the caption, and really this perfectly captures my entire journalism career. It says, this is the tail's end, says the caption, as we come to the. So I've made a living really telling bad puns my whole life. And so it's been a delight.
Well, Geoff, I can't think of a better point in which to end than that.
Right, exactly right. This is indeed the tail's end. Thank you, Alan. Nice to be on.
Oh, thank you very much for coming on, and appreciate everybody listening. If you've enjoyed this, and who am I kidding? Of course you enjoyed this. It was great. It was wonderful. I got a world-class guest here, really classing up the place. I appreciate it. If you enjoyed it, please share us on social media. Email it around if you receive this by email. Email me if you have a suggestion for a new guest, or you want to ask me a question. And Geoff, now that hopefully things are loosening up, the restrictions, I hope I'll see you around campus.
All right. Thanks very much.
All right. Thank you.